These problems of lack of willpower, I don't know what I want in life, I'm not motivated enough, I get bored easily, I can't focus. Oh, everyone has ADHD now. All of these problems are related to screens. And what we're seeing is that people who develop screens, app developers, platforms, video game designers, the way that they compete with each other is by activating more circuits of your brain. Today, we're going to talk about end-stage screen addiction. And this is becoming an increasingly important topic because as addictions are progressing for years and years and years, they start to change or transform over time. In the early stages of alcohol addiction, we have things like cravings, we get the shakes, we get withdrawal. Fair enough. But if you look at end-stage alcohol addiction, it starts to affect a lot of other organ systems in our body. We can start to see cardiotoxicity in our heart. We start to see hepatomegaly, which is a swelling of the liver, liver cirrhosis, liver cancer. And if you really look at it from the surface level, alcohol and the way it affects your brain is very different from like the organ system of the liver, right? When we think about, okay, we have a therapist who is trained in alcohol addiction, they're not necessarily trained in cirrhosis of the liver. And this is what we're starting to see in end-stage screen addiction, where it starts off with a clear idea of addiction. I can't put this screen away, right? It may start with, okay, I want to play a video game, and then what's happening is I can't get rid of the screen, so when I go to the toilet, I'm taking the screen with me. And then it ends up with, instead of taking the game to the toilet, what I'm going to do is move the toilet and replace my chair with the toilet so that I can play in a degenerate way longer than any other normal human. And this is actually what we're starting to see in end-stage screen addiction. This is a relatively new concept because, frankly, it's a relatively new phenomenon. The smartphone was invented, I think, around 2007. So now 2 decades in to people using screens, as a psychiatrist, I am seeing manifestations of screen addiction that are almost like entirely new. And the real issue here is that most of the problems that I see people struggling with, like I have a lack of motivation, I don't know what to do in my life, I'm sort of directionless, I have difficulty with willpower. All of these, I believe, are manifestations of actually years and years of screen addiction. Hey y'all, if you're interested in applying some of the principles that we discuss to your life to actually create change, check out Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health. The guide synthesized my years of training as a monk, along with years of clinical experience as a psychiatrist, to cover common topics like meditation, ADHD, and trauma. The guides include over 100 additional videos that can be navigated based on your needs or interests, or in a more open, choose-your-own-adventure format. The guides are now available in the YouTube store below, and if they're a little bit outside of your price point, you can check out a piece of them with our free resource packs, which are also linked below. So definitely check them out. So let's start with the first manifestation of what I would call end-stage screen addiction, which is terminal boredom. So what we're starting to see is in the early stages of, let's say, some kind of screen addiction, you want to use the screen more and more and more, but as you do this for years and years and years, I'm starting to see a very scary clinical phenomenon of people being so intensely bored that they can't do anything. So let's understand a little bit about how this works. So at the beginning, let's say I've got 3 dopamine receptors, okay? And I've got 3 molecules of dopamine. This is a normal situation. So if I read a book, my brain will release 3 molecules of dopamine. They go over here, and then I will get, 1x pleasure, 1x pleasure, 1x pleasure. So if I read a book, I've got a normal number of receptors, a normal amount of dopamine, and a normal amount of pleasure. Now, when I add screens to the picture, and I play video games or watch pornography or scroll on social media, we increase the dopamine release over time. So as we increase the dopamine release, what actually happens, now we're getting a 6x signal, right? Because we're doubling the amount of dopamine. Our body does this thing called adapt or develops tolerance. So anytime we overstimulate a particular receptor, that receptor actually gets downregulated. So if we drink a lot of alcohol, we will develop tolerance to alcohol. If we use a lot of marijuana or nicotine, we will develop tolerance to it. And where does tolerance happen? Tolerance happens by the elimination of our receptors. So the signal release is still the same, right? But now what's happening is our responsiveness to it is actually decreasing. So what this ends up doing is once I cut back on one receptor, I literally remove it from the membrane of my cell. Now the video game, instead of giving me a 6x response, is now giving me a 4x response because there's only enough space for 4 of these molecules. So what tends to happen over time is this situation gets worse. So the less fun games become, the longer we have to play them. So now what I'm doing is I'm increasing my signal to 9x, and I'm super saturating my receptors. So now I'm back to a 6x signal, right? And then what happens is my brain develops further tolerance. So now we're like, hold on a second, the dopamine signal is way too high, let's get rid of it. And so we remove another receptor, and now what happens is we have very few receptors. So what does this look like over time? So the stage 1 of this addiction is games are fun. Stage 2 of this addiction is games are less fun. Stage 3 of this addiction, which a lot of people have experienced, is that other things are less fun, right? And so this happens a lot where when you play a lot of games, and we saw this like, a few years into technology addictions developing, like even when I started streaming 5 years ago, many people would say, okay, I have a lot of trouble. Things just aren't very fun for me. And now even in the last 5 years, what I've seen, I think it's kind of crazy to think about, but like, smartphones were invented, let's say 17 years ago. So if we're talking about the end stage of addiction, even 5 years ago, this was 12 years ago, addictions weren't quite as bad. And now that people have been addicted for an additional 5 years, we're starting to see a new thing, which I would call terminal boredom. And I see this so much. It's been growing a lot in the people that I work with over the last 5 years, where it used to be that they had difficulty enjoying things like reading books or going for walks or things like that. People are like, oh, that stuff just isn't as fun. And now what I'm seeing is a terminal level of boredom, where anytime you do anything that is not related to a screen, you experience an intense an unsolvable level of boredom. It starts to feel like reading is like torture. Your mind can't focus. You're kind of doing this and this. You're like, okay, maybe I need to sign up for a class or I need to do a coding boot camp. But like the second you try to do anything else, it seems like your brain just doesn't grab onto it at all. Things that you used to feel enjoyable are just not enjoyable anymore. So terminal boredom is characterized by 3 things: an intense experience of boredom, which means when you try to do anything, you just feel like this is not fun or enjoyable at all. The second thing that I've started to see is almost a physiological restlessness or physical discomfort when you're not using a screen. And the third thing is an inability to focus your mind on anything that is not screen-oriented or highly dopaminergic. What people end up with is an inability to do anything that is not like related to a screen. This is how we're seeing these people like NEETs, right? Not in education, employment, or training, or people just feel really crippled in other dimensions of their life. The second thing that I've started to see, which is super scary, is something that I'd call an introspective failure. So introspective failure starts with doing my work when I'm supposed to and using my free time gaming. Over time, what this results at is missed opportunities, right? So what happens, what I'm seeing more and more of is like, okay, I finished my first year of college, I kind of got B's, but in the summer, instead of doing an internship, this is free time, so I'm going to do more gaming, okay? And as we start to miss out on opportunities, our possibilities in life, this is the range of my possibility when I'm a freshman in college, and then I skip my first set of internships in my first summer, right? So this is the gaming during the summer. Now my range of possibilities is narrower, and then I don't do extracurricular activities because I'm going home and I'm gaming in my free time, which means that I'm spending I lose out on more opportunities. And then eventually what happens is I graduate from college, but I don't have any extracurriculars. I haven't done any internships. And so then this ends up with, it's very, very, very difficult for me to have a job. So it starts out that gaming or screen time is eating up our free time, and then we end up with a very, very narrow range of stuff. So the other thing that tends to happen here is if you look at this trend, what's happening? Our screen time is increasing. And so as our screen time increases, this creates a second problem, which we know that screens, doesn't matter if it's social media, doesn't matter if it's pornography, video games, suppress our amygdala and limbic system. So what this results in is decreased emotional awareness, right? So when I'm not feeling good about myself, I can play a game, and a game will artificially give me a sense of pleasure or joy. And then when it gives me that sense of pleasure or joy, it'll also suppress the shame, the sadness, the anxiety, or whatever. So what I'm starting to see is something that I would call introspective failure, which is a combination of loss of opportunities and a heavy amount of emotional suppression. So what this kind of results in is at the very beginning, it's like, okay, I'm going to major in this particular thing. I want to be a programmer when I grow up. Maybe I want to work for a video game company. And over time, as I have fewer and fewer opportunities, as I don't socialize with people, as I don't have a mentor and an internship, as I stop doing extracurriculars, my view of what I want from the future starts to narrow, right? I don't really know what the possibilities are because they're all just vague possibilities in my mind. So I don't really know what's out there. And as I don't know what's really out there, that combined with suppressing my internal signals results in an inability to understand what I even want from life. So this starts out with, okay, I have some dreams and I'm gaming. The dreams get narrower, I'm gaming more. The dreams get narrower, I'm gaming more. I try to do things, I try to apply for jobs. That doesn't work. So I can't support those kinds of dreams. Then I have difficulty socializing with my friends because they're so much further ahead of me. I can't relate to them. They're going on vacations because they have intro level developer jobs and they're making $120K a year and I'm not making any money. So I fall further and further behind. And as I fall further behind, my technology use increases. As my technology use increases, my emotions get suppressed. And this ends up with being completely directionless in life. I don't know what I want. I used to have hopes. I used to have dreams. Sometimes I have fantasies, but I don't even know what I want my life to look like. I just know I don't want it to be this. But the challenge is that if we suppress our emotions, that takes away a primary motivational drive to affect change. So if we think about emotions like sadness, anger, shame, what is the purpose of these emotions? When I feel ashamed, that's my brain giving me motivation. Hey, don't ever feel ashamed again. Therefore, you need to change your appearance. You need to change the way that you talk. You need to get into shape. You need to make more money. Shame is something that drives us towards corrective action. But what I'm starting to see is this introspective failure where people don't even know what they want anymore as a consequence of lack of opportunities and a lack of being able to connect with yourself. So once we get into this introspective failure, then we sort of result in people really being stuck. Because in the past, the problem was I know what I want, but I can't bring myself to do it. And we eventually 8, 9, 10 years after doing this stuff, I don't even know what I want anymore. And if I don't know what I want, how on earth am I supposed to find motivation? Because now I even it's not about a lack of motivation. It's about a complete lack of direction plus a lack of motivation. Now, there's another thing that kind of relates to this, which is the third thing that we're going to talk about, the third feature of end-stage screen addiction, which is a lack of willpower. So this is really important to understand. When we say a lack of willpower, what a lot of people who use screens will do is they'll say okay, this is where I am. This is where I want to go. Okay, this is the direction I want to go. But I cannot bring myself from here to here. I'll get distracted. I want to play video games. I want to watch porn. I want to eat a Hot Pocket, right? I want to exercise, but I can't bring myself to do it. I lack willpower. I lack discipline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what they describe, but this is not actually a lack of willpower. So let's understand how human behavior works, okay? So if a human being wants to go from here to here, this involves two things. There is a motivational drive plus a willpower to overcome resistance, okay? This is what results in behavior. Does that kind of make sense? So if we kind of think about going to the gym, if I don't feel like going to the gym, then I need to use a lot of willpower. But the cool thing about going to the gym, if you talk to people who are in shape and stuff, right? People who do a lot of extracurriculars towards a particular professional goal, they're not using willpower all the time. In fact, the majority of what they're using is actually motivation, right? Why am I going to extracurriculars? Because this is a goal that I have and I'm moving towards that goal. So I'm actually motivated towards it. So I want y'all to understand this. The less motivational drive you have, the more willpower you need in order to act. And so what gamers will experience, what end-stage screen addicts will experience is, I don't have enough will. That's correct. They'll say, I don't have any willpower. That's incorrect. What it really is that I don't have enough willpower. So the really crazy thing about end-stage screen addicts that I work with is that their willpower is oftentimes very high. It's actually way higher than other people. Now, this may sound insane because you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, I have no willpower. So let's use an example, okay? So if you take someone who has a mood disorder like depression, this person doesn't do much throughout the day, right? They have difficulty. They can't even get out of bed. And if they get out of bed, we look at this person and we say, and this person subjectively believes, I have very little willpower. I can barely get out of bed. But them getting out of bed is not a deficiency of willpower. It is a complete loss of motivation. This is something that we call anhedonia or amotivational drives. These are common in depression. So the only thing that they can use to get out of bed is actually a very high amount of willpower, because most of us, when we wake up in the morning, we're lucky enough to want to get out of bed, right? When you wake up in the morning and you get out of bed, why do you get out of bed? Because you feel like peeing, because you want your cup of coffee, because you're ready to start the day, because you want to be finished with work, might as well get it over with. Or you wake up on a Sunday and you're like, I have nothing to do today. I can't wait to get out of bed and do something fun. So what we really see in depression is not a failure of willpower, it is a failure of motivation. And this is what we're starting to see in end-stage screen addiction. Now, you may say, but Dr. K, didn't you already talk about that? Didn't we talk about introspective failure and sort of like not having a lack of, or having a lack of motivation? Fair enough. We'll talk about motivation a little bit more at the end. But let's understand the mechanism for this lack of willpower, and y'all may be surprised, okay? So we have a brain, and in our brain, we have different circuits. We have different anatomical portions. And we also have a that looks like a Metroid. Holy Jesus. Cool. Metroid. Okay. So in our brain, we have all these different circuits, and we have all these different biological drives. So we have a drive towards agency. This means I want to be in control of my life. We have a drive towards mastery. I want to get good at something. We have a drive towards socialization, or let's call it community, actually. I think that's a better word. So we have a drive towards community, right? So we want to connect with others. We have a drive towards identity. We want to be someone in life, right? I want to be proud of the person that I am. I want to be able to hold my head up high. I want other people to speak well about me. They're like, oh, who is Alok? Who is Dr. K? Oh, Dr. K is really cool. Like, we all want this, right? And last thing that we want is safety. We have a very fundamental human drive. I don't need to put anything here because safety is safety. We have a fundamental human drive of wanting to be safe. So if we look at the human brain, these kinds of drives motivate us to act. Okay, so there's a really great example of this, which is psychologists were looking at like why children don't give up when they're doing things like learning how to walk, right? So if you think about a child who's learning how to walk, it's just full of failure. It's like you don't even know how to use your freaking legs or your feet. Like, you suck at this, kid. You completely suck at it. And yet children, despite the fact that they fall, despite the fact that they hurt themselves, despite the fact that it's really, really hard, children don't give up when it comes to learning how to walk, right? So as like a 25-year-old NEET, like it's very easy for me and you to give up on things. That's what I did. I gave up on life when I was like 18 or 19 years old. But for some reason, kids don't give up, even though objectively they experience way more failure than an adult does. So what is it that drives a kid to learn how to walk, to learn how to pick up objects? It turns out that it's this thing called intent to mastery. So not just human beings, but even if you look at like, monkeys or birds, they're driven to become good at stuff. So we see the intent to mastery also manifest in things like, why do people respect me for going to Harvard, right? That's more respectful than, let's say, going to the University of Texas, which is where I did my undergrad. Why is that? Why do people respect Olympic athletes more than like amateur athletes? So we have this societal level thing where the harder something is to do, the more you master it, the more we respect it. So that's just one example of the intent to mastery, but we also have a desire to be in control of our lives, right? All human beings want to be in control of our lives. All human beings want some sense of community, unless you've got like schizoid personality disorder. All human beings want to be safe. All human beings want to be proud of themselves. So what does this have to do with motivational drive? Really important to understand. So the problem with technology is that it tricks us into satisfying these drives, right? So when I look at, let's say I play a MOBA, and what do I want to do? Like I was playing with someone yesterday who spent 10,000 hours playing a MOBA, okay? So I want y'all to think about this for a second, right? So Malcolm Gladwell has this 10,000 hour rule. Medical school is about 10,000 hours. Residency is probably even a little bit more. But like, I know people who have spent 10,000 hours in 2 separate video games. Let's say something like an FPS and a MOBA. Like I know people like this who spent 10,000 hours. And in those 10,000 hours, I did med school. I'm not like trying to like a humble brag or flex or anything. I'm just pointing out to y'all like how much time we spend on this stuff, right? This is how long it took me to become a psychiatrist. This is how long it took me to get through medical school. And we have people who will spend 10,000 hours doing this. I probably spent close to 10,000 hours playing video games like in high school and college, right? So I'm in this camp too. But if you stop and think about it, why the hell do people spend this much time playing video games? Like, what the hell is going on in their brain where they can do this day after day after day after day after day? Dopamine is insufficient for this. Because if you look at playing these games, what happens? I get this trophy, woohoo! And then I get this trophy, and then I get this trophy, and then I get this kind of trophy, whatever, right? And then it has these sparkles over here. So if we look at video games, the tricky thing that they do is that they start to satisfy all of these drives. They give me a sense of control in my life because the real world, I don't control anything, right? I don't control how much money I make. I don't control whether people like me or not. But in the video game, I can play a single player RPG like Baldur's Gate and I can have complete control over everything. I can even open up console commands and essentially be a god within the video game. When it comes to mastery, games and social media and all these tech platforms are really good at giving you trophies and giving you a sense that you've progressed, right? Gamification. I once went to a conference at Harvard Medical School where people were talking about like the gamification of a mental health app. How can we turn a mental health app into a game so that people stick with it, so that they become addicted to it, but for their own benefit, right? I'm going to addict you, but it will be good for you. We get a sense of community. So as we make more and more friends on Discord, as we have these online relationships, our drive to connect to other people actually decreases. Then we start to develop an identity, right? So I'm on the internet, I'm Nubs. Right? So you start to develop a identity of who you are. You have a character, you have cosmetics, and gaming companies understand this. We have social media is all about crafting an artificial identity. And then the other beautiful thing is that the internet is a very safe place, right? Because if I don't like someone, if I don't like my boss, or if I get bullied at school, I have to deal with them tomorrow, right? I don't get to run away from my bullies. I have to go to school every day. That's something that I lived for 10 years of my life, is facing my bullies every single day. And if I don't like my boss, like I have to stick with it for a little while. But when it comes to video games, hey, I don't like this person. The games give us the opportunities to block players, to avoid players. I never want to see this person again. If I screw things up with one group of online friends, I can just go join a different online group of friends. If I get banned from one community, I can go to a place where I feel safe. Now, the biggest problem here is that it's not that these things just gratify these needs. It's that when you use technology, when you use social media to craft a sense of identity, when you use cosmetics to craft a sense of identity, the problem is that it depletes your motivation to fix it in the real world. There are just enough parts of your brain that get fooled by the artificial or virtual activation of these needs that then your brain doesn't feel hungry anymore to fix things in your real life, right? When I go home and I'm feeling lonely and I hop onto Discord and I'm hanging out with my friends, the drive, the need, the desperation to connect with other people just becomes something that I feel at the edges of my day, right? When I'm going to bed at night, I kind of think back and I'm like, man, I really long for human touch. Sometimes when I'm taking a shower, I start to think about how lonely I am. But then the moment that the shower stops, I have something playing on my phone and Arrested Development is so great. Right? And then I'm back to the screens, I'm back to the social media, I'm back to the video games, and then all of my real needs get pushed to the side. So this is what we're seeing with end-stage screen addiction. is that as more of your psychological needs get fulfilled, the motivational drive to actually fix your life goes way down. Because it's kind of like thinking to yourself, like, I'll give you all an analogy. So if my body craves nutrition, if I'm like, I need to eat broccoli, I need to eat asparagus, I need to eat lean proteins, I need to eat whole grains. If I eat a couple of Twinkies and Doritos, even though I'm not satisfying my nutrition, I'm getting a ton of artificial calories, and that kills my sense of hunger, right? So I was talking to a streamer who's like eats this cheesy rice, and they're so calorically deficient, they're so starving because they've been suppressing all of their hunger signals, all of their nutritional signals, that after a 10-hour gaming binge, they'll like make a pot of rice and then they'll add like cheese to it, and like they like mac and cheese, but just rice, and then you scoop it into your face. So this is what technology is doing to us. It's basically the cheesy rice for our brains. It's very calorically dense and not nutritious at all. But the problem is once you have a belly full of cheesy rice, your desire to eat broccoli decreases completely. It's completely shot. So in the end stage of screen addiction, what starts to happen is at the very beginning, we're getting part of our needs met in the real world, and then we get some enjoyment out of life. But out of video games. But over time, what happens is we get fewer and fewer psychological needs met by the real world, and then we rely on the virtual world to fulfill my sense of being good at something, right? This is why people tilt so much in video games. It's like, I feel like such a loser in real life that I really want to dumpster some crappy POS noob. I'm going to put this person in their place in a Reddit argument about quantum mechanics and philosophy, or in a video game when I'm going to aim hack in Deadlock because I need to feel like a winner. Right? So this is what happens. And as we feel like a winner in a game like Deadlock or whatever, aim hacking, whatever happens, then that part of our brain gets a little bit satisfied. As it gets a little bit satisfied, our motivational drive actually decreases. As our motivational drive decreases, we do less in the real world. As we do less in the real world, then something scary happens. We become dependent on the screen to fulfill our psychological needs. And that's ultimately what end-stage screen addiction looks like. It's a lack of willpower, which is not a lack of willpower. It's just you can't use willpower to substitute for a motivational drive at all, right? So if you're struggling with end-stage screen addiction, I want you to think about the subjective experience of doing something healthy, of stopping to play the video game. Just look at yourself and look at how Herculean your effort is. It is so hard to leave the house. It is so hard to go for that third job interview after you've been rejected from the first two. If you really look at yourself, it's not that there's a lack of willpower, it's that the amount of willpower that you need to overcome your resistance is so high. So that's because there's a lack of a motivational drive. You really don't feel like doing it, right? So everything that you have to do has to require a ton of willpower. Let's talk about decay of motivational drive. So this is step number 4. Now, y'all may be saying, but Dr. K, didn't we just talk about lack of motivational drive? Yeah. So we've talked about 2 systems, but now we're going to tie everything together. So what I see in people is not just a lack of willpower, but an overall failure of motivational drive. And this has a couple of different components to it. So we have to understand what dopamine does. Okay, so now we're going to talk about dopamine. So dopamine gives us pleasure, gives us behavioral reinforcement, and gives us craving. So one is the psychological needs that get fulfilled through games and how that creates a lack of motivation. But then there's also motivation on a very specific dopaminergic nucleus accumbens level. So let's understand this. So if I eat a Twinkie, I get a rush of pleasure. And the part of my brain that gives me a rush of pleasure also creates a desire for a Twinkie tomorrow. That's what we call behavioral reinforcement. So I'm going to want a Twinkie tomorrow. And then it also creates craving, right? So the way that we reinforce behavior, the way that we get the human organism to repeat the behavior is by giving us a craving. Now, this is a huge problem because when I do something like play a video game, I get a rush of pleasure, and then I create a craving to play the video game tomorrow. So what I'm actually doing is motivating myself tomorrow to play a video game. The moment that I have fun with something, I feel motivated to do it again. So if we look at something like falling in love is also mediated by dopamine. I'm not talking about being attracted to someone, and I'm not talking about being in love with someone in a long-term relationship. So if you really look at the process of falling in love, where you're like, oh my God, I just want to touch this person. I just need to be in their presence. I want to smell, oh my God, just everything about them. Oh my God, I can't stay away. That falling in love, that intoxicating falling in love, is mediated by our dopaminergic circuitry, okay? So it gives us pleasure and it creates cravings towards that thing. So now we run into another kind of motivational drive problem, which is that once we start using our dopamine on screens, we have less dopamine available to reinforce other behaviors, okay? So this is important to understand. When it comes to dopamine, we have a fixed quantity of dopamine in our brain, okay? It gets stored in these things called vesicles. So we have these little pouches of dopamine that then get released out into the space between two neurons, and then they float over to our dopamine receptors, okay? This is how it works. Now, the really interesting thing is that we used to think that once we release dopamine, it gets repackaged and we can use it again, which is somewhat true. But clinically, what I've really observed is that you basically have a fixed amount of dopamine every single day. Now, what that means is that, I hope this makes sense. So remember that dopamine creates behavioral reinforcement and craving. So the way that you spend your dopamine today determines what you will want to do tomorrow. So for example, today, I'm just going to be straight with y'all. It's Saturday at 2 p.m. I'm working. Okay? Why am I working on a Saturday at 2 p.m. instead of taking a day off? It's because when I wake up in the morning, I've got a fixed amount of dopamine, and what I'm going to do is make a video. Now, if we think about it, if I have a ton of dopamine and I make a video, like, I'm loving this right now. Y'all can look at my face like, this is hype, right? Like, I'm doing something good for the world. I feel good about it. It's fun. So now when I make a video, I'm going to get 8 units of dopamine released. What this means is that tomorrow my desire to work, because I have dopaminergically reinforced doing work on a weekend, right? This is how I work 6 to 7 days a week. Because when I wake up first thing in the morning, what I try to do is do some work, and then you feel good about it. Like, y'all know what I mean? Think about the subjective experience of when you wake up in the morning, you're like, I'm going to like take care of some work today. And then noon rolls around and you're like, I've gotten so much done, because you have utilized your dopamine to reinforce your desire to work. I have now motivated myself. And if you do this properly, you can even create cravings for work. Like, it's beautiful. Now, the problem with end-stage screen addiction is that we wake up in the morning, we have a limited amount of dopamine, right? We've developed tolerance, so instead of 3 dopamine receptors, I only have 1. I play a game, and then I release a lot of this dopamine over here, right? So here's 8 units. And I get 8 units for 1 unit of pleasure. So then what happens, since I'm resistant to the dopamine, I have to play something else, I have to watch anime, I have to eat other kinds of food. Now I've suppressed my hunger signals. I'm going to use my last 4 units of dopamine to get a little bit more pleasure. And then my dopamine stack is empty. And once my dopamine stack is empty, I try to work. And then the problem is, once my dopamine stack is empty, I don't enjoy it, right? Do y'all enjoy work? Of course not, because you have no dopamine left. And if you have no dopamine left, you can't enjoy work. And if you don't enjoy work, there will be no craving, no motivation, or no behavioral reinforcement. So this is what I tend to see in end-stage screen addiction. This process has gotten so bad that their dopaminergic tolerance is so high that even if they do some amount of work, they don't feel any pleasure from it, right? And if they don't feel any pleasure, that means we're not activating our dopaminergic circuitry, which means I won't get behavioral reinforcement and I won't create cravings for myself. The last dimension of end-stage screen addiction is executive dysfunction. So our frontal lobes do 2 things. They plan, well, they do a lot more, and execute actions, and they control impulses. So if you look at people who are like normal, what they end up doing is planning for the future, right? They're like, man, I'm going to go to, so I had friends like this, right? So when I was in high school, I had friends who were also going to be doctors. We were all going to be doctors. And they're like, yeah. So one of my friends applied for a 6-year accelerated medical program where you basically go straight into med school after high school. And she was kind of committed to doing what she wanted to do. They plan and they move towards a particular future in a very like focused and aggressive way. What our frontal lobes do, they take abstract goals and they break them up into pieces. Like if I think about, okay, I want to be happy. What is that? That's an abstract goal. Like I have no idea like what the steps to be happy are, right? But then my brain sits down and is like, okay, if I want to be happy, I need to get financially independent. I need to find a relationship and I need to take care of my physical health. I need to take care of my mental health. Then out of the being happy, in order to become financially successful, I need to get a good degree. In order to get a good degree, I have to go to a good college. In order to go to a good college, I have to study very hard. In order to study very hard, this Tuesday, I have to study for my math test this Friday. So if you look at what the frontal lobe does, and this is what we call maturity, by the way, it takes like this abstract goal and it breaks it down into tiny little pieces. And this is how someone becomes successful in life, right? They take 1,000 tiny steps in one direction, and over the course of a couple of years, they end up in a good place. This capacity to plan and execute tasks over time is what our frontal lobe does. So I'll give you all a simple example of this, right? Like, oh, I have a party this weekend. Or forget about party, I'm hosting D&D at my house. So even then, our executive function has to plan, right? So it has to be like, okay, I'm going to invite these 6 people. I need to invite them on Monday so that I give them a day or two to figure out if they're coming on Wednesday. On Wednesday, I need to go to the grocery store. I'm going to be doing a smoked whatever. So an 8-hour, I'm going to stick something in the smoker so that we can eat really well. Playing with D&D with me is a lot of fun, by the way, if you haven't figured that out. Because we eat really well. We're not degenerate gamers with Doritos and Mountain Dew. It's like some weird highfalutin, like tea and all this other crap. It's great. Anyway, so executive function plans out the stuff, and then I have to like do all the steps in time so that I can, do something fun. So this is what executive function is. Now, the problem is that when we use screens, the executive function in our brain starts to rust. Because I want y'all to think about whatever screen you use, how much do you have to plan and execute? You don't have to do crap, right? When I load up for a game, they make it so easy for me to queue. I don't have to think about which trophies I'm grinding. I don't have to think about this or think about that. It's all automatic. They break apart all the steps for you. So I even remember like when I was playing Morrowind, right? So 100 years ago, back in the good old days of gaming, like there's this Elder Scrolls game called Morrowind. It's Elder Scrolls 3. And one of the first quests that you get is like, you need to go to Sulipund and Punabi. And they give you this really complex text about how to find Sulipund and Punabi. They're like, leave Balmora from the east exit, follow the river until you come to the bridge, cross the bridge, and on your left, there's going to be a dry gulch. Follow the gulch north until the second hill, and then go right past the hill. And so this is the way that games used to be. There was no objective markers telling you on your mini-map where you need to go. So if you think about what games do, what social media does, you don't have to show up on social media and you're like, okay, today, when I'm browsing TikTok, I need to look at these 18 shorts. Because if I look at these 18 shorts, I will check these boxes and I will progress in life. No, you show up, you go like this, and you're like, give me the content, man. Come on, son. Oh, yeah, give me that content. Give me that content. Oh, yeah, give me that trophy. Just do it, like, figure it out for me. I'm not going to think at all. Oh, my God, yeah. Right? Your frontal lobes are completely shut off. And this is the key thing to understand about the human organism, the human brain, the human body. The human body doesn't wear out. The human body rusts. If you don't use your muscles, they'll become flabby. If you use them more, you will become stronger. So the problem right now, if you look at all of these apps, right? Any kind of screen tries to take the work away from you. If you watch any kind of like streaming service, they even know, they're like, hey, you just need to click. We're going to tell you what to watch. We're going to entice you. We think you'll love this because it's similar. We're going to take all the work away from you. You don't have to plan anything. All you have to do is, oh, yeah. And then, oh, we figured out that you need to autoplay. We're even going to skip the credits. It used to be in streaming services, like you'd have to watch the credits or you'd have to manually move to the next episode. But these streaming services have figured out, oh, that's too much to fucking hitting next episode is too much to ask of you. We're going to do it for you, right? We're going to autoplay the next episode. We're going to skip past the intro because we figured out you don't like watching the intros. right? We're going to give you the option. It's really easy to skip past the intro. We're going to do things for you easier and easier and easier and easier. We are going to make your frontal lobes more and more rusty. And as we use technology like this, what I've started to see is an end-stage screen addiction. People literally do not know how to plan their lives. They can't take an abstract issue like, I need to move out of the house. They don't know what the steps are. And it's not that they're dumb or anything. It's that the part of their brain that takes moving out of the house and breaks it up into pieces stops working. Now, the second thing that happens that all these screens have gotten really good at is impulse control. So the whole problem with impulse control is that our brain, our frontal lobes normally control our impulses, right? So when I sit down to study, my brain will be like, let's not study. Let's use this. And then and then I have to control it. My brain is like, no, we're not going to give into that impulse. We're going to sit down. We're going to focus on studying. There's impulse control. I have an impulse to stop studying, and I have an impulse to, I don't feel like going to that party. I have an impulse to not go to the party. So I'm going to ignore the party. I'm going to just stay home. It's an impulse. I have an impulse to stay in my bed and binge watch another episode of the show, as opposed to getting out of my bed and showering. Right? These are all impulses that we have. The impulse to stay still, the impulse to queue for another game, can't quit on a win, can't stop on a loss, right? Or can't quit on a loss, can't stop on a win. So this is what happens. So our frontal lobes control our impulses. But now what's happening is the more we use technology, they're not trying to get us to control our impulses. They are activating impulses for us. So if you look at what's happening with all technology, they're making it easy for you to keep watching. You don't have to restrain or control yourself at all. We're going to autoplay the next video. We're going to show you more bright sounds and more bright colors. Right now, after a game, there's an MVP thing. And have y'all ever wondered this? Sometimes I wonder whether everyone sees the same MVP at the end of a game. Which video game company out there has figured out, you're going to be MVP 30% of the time. That's the fixed rule. And other people may see other kinds of MVPs, but why is it that MVP has to be the same person on every single match, right? It's kind of bizarre. But this is what video game companies are doing. They're figuring out how to control your impulses by making it brighter, by making it faster. So short form content is really good at this, where they're like, okay, if you have an impulse to scroll, we're going to make it so easy for you to scroll. Bored with this? No problem. Just touch, just a little bit, just a tiny little touch, and we'll give you the dopamine. You don't have to restrain your impulse. You don't have to make it to the end of the video. Ridiculous, right? Make it to the end of the video until you unlock the next one? Hell nah. We're going to make it so easy for you to give in to your impulses constantly. And all these platforms are fighting a war where they're trying to give into your impulses more and more and more. If you get bored with TikTok, you're going to jump over to YouTube Shorts. If you get bored with YouTube Shorts, you're going to jump over to Instagram Reels. So all these platforms are fighting, and the key thing that's happening is the more time you spend on them, the less control you have over your impulses. So as you use technology for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, I'm seeing a decay in executive function, a decay in the ability to control our impulses, a decay in the ability to operationalize tasks, break tasks apart, split them up into their pieces, which, by the way, requires impulse control, right? If I'm planning a party, I have to stop playing games so that I can go to the grocery store. Those two things get really tied together. So this is the other feature of end-stage screen addiction. And the last thing to consider is that so many of the problems that we see today, these problems of lack of willpower, I don't know what I want in life, I'm not motivated enough, I get bored easily, I can't focus, everyone has ADHD now, I have social difficulties, we didn't even get to that. All of these problems are related to screens. And what we're seeing is that people who develop screens, app developers, platforms, video game designers, the way that they compete with each other is by activating more circuits of your brain. There was single-player RPG, and then we added MMOs, a multiplayer component. Then we added progression. You can play games like Genshin Impact or FF14 and never beat the game. There is constantly more agency, more mastery, more community, more identity. Oh yeah, I'm Grand Marshal of whatever. I'm Gladiator. Rank. I'm this rank. I'm that rank. I'm Immortal rank. I'm Challenger League. They're giving us all of these things to activate different parts of our brain. And so as they're activating all these kinds of things, it's manifesting as so many of the problems that we see in today's world. And what's going on? Everyone's got a lack of willpower. They can't focus. Everyone's ADHD now. And what's the one big correlation? Technology use has risen to 4 hours and 37 minutes per day for the average person. This can go as high as 6 or 7 hours. Like, I know y'all, this is the HG community. So 4 hours and 37 minutes of screen time is amateur hour for us. I think that's cell phone use, by the way. So that doesn't include other screens, right? Crazy. Amateur numbers over there. God tier gamer like myself, goated gamer of all time, goated NEET of all time. I can, those are rookie numbers, son. So if you have any of these problems, chances are it correlates in some way to your screen time usage. This is what I've seen clinically. And we don't even have studies for this stuff because like this stuff is so new, we don't even think, we're still debating whether video game addiction is a real thing or not. So things are moving so slow that we don't even realize this stuff. So if you're struggling with these things, I'd strongly, strongly recommend that you listen to your instinct, which is that screen use is a big part of the problem that you face. And start by taking a break, being in nature, going for a walk every day, and delay your screen time as much as possible. Do as much productive stuff as you can so that you reinforce the right kind of behaviors.